Hi there. My name is Grier Cooper and I am a San Francisco wedding photographer. As a former professional ballet dancer, I specialize in guiding couples gracefully in and out of poses for their photos, and the images I create are evocative of the timeless elegance of ballet. It's my pleasure today to talk to you a little bit about how to work together to create wedding photography that will serve our couples and to serve all of us wedding professionals as well, because photography is a representation of all of our collective talents. It's a way to showcase everyone's work. So, the first thing I'd like to do is ask you a question. What is your favorite part of a wedding day? And the reason I ask this question is because I think it's an important thing for each of us to keep in mind so that we bring our very best selves to every couple we serve. We're able to keep our energy fresh, we're able to stay inspired, and we're able to create an amazing experience for them. So what is your favorite part of a wedding day? It might be two people who are crazy in love. I know I fall in love with every couple I work with. You might be one of those people who loves the dress. You really want to see what is that bride going to wear. Will it be a more high fashion type of a dress? Something more simple? Will it have a long train, veil, no veil? Or maybe you're more into the groom, what he's going to wear. Maybe you like those moments of seeing him waiting in nervous anticipation a few moments before the ceremony, or walking proudly down the aisle on his way to get married. Maybe it's the first look, or the first kiss, or the first dance. Maybe you love details. I know I do. That's one of my favorite things to photograph on any given wedding day. Maybe you're really into those moments of high emotion, and there are plenty of those throughout the day. Maybe it's the awesome venues. Or you might be a total foodie, and we all know there's plenty of amazing food on any wedding day. You might really love cake. I know I do. It might be the bouquet toss or those zany moments on the dance floor. Whatever your favorite moment is during a wedding day, what every one of these images has in common is that it took the collective talents of a whole team of wedding vendors working behind the scenes to make them happen. So I look at wedding photography, as I said, not just as a way to serve our couples, although that's always first and foremost in my mind as a photographer, but I also am always blown away by how much talent and effort goes into creating an amazing wedding day. So each of these photographs is also showcasing your work. Therefore, I think we can all agree that it's really important to work together to support your photographer so that we can create those images that are going to showcase your talents. Because let's face it, every time a couple shares images, flips through their album, it's a statement about you and about what you're able to offer. So one of the ways that we can all work together to create photography that showcases our work is to really work before the day of on communication. Now, obviously, every single one of you who's a part of this group already understands the need for creating relationships and nurturing them. But on any given day when we work at a wedding, oftentimes we work with people we haven't worked with before. So it's great to make sure that we exchange information and build and nurture those relationships moving forward. I'm also going to invoke a word that we all probably feel equal parts love and dread, and that word is the timeline. The timeline is our blueprint for how the day is broken up, what's going to happen when, who's going to do it, and I think we can all agree that it's imperative that we all stick to the timeline. Because what happens when just one vendor doesn't come through in a timely way, the whole rest of the day is thrown off. Things run behind, and sadly what usually suffers most is the wedding photography, particularly the portraits, the couples portraits and the group shots that happen after the ceremony. That is when people most often try to make up lost time, and we don't want couples to have two portraits of themselves. That's one of the most important parts of their photography. So what I thought we would do is work through a wedding day chronologically, beginning with hair and makeup, because obviously hair and makeup is the first part of the day, and it's also typically where things can go wrong, where we can start to run behind. And there are a few things that we can do to make sure that this does not happen. First and foremost, I recommend doing a trial run beforehand. Typically, I suggest that my couples do this on the day that we do their engagement photos, and that's where they get sort of a double bang for their time. First, you get the hair and makeup all figured out, because let's face it, there's nothing worse. I've seen brides in tears when they're trying their 5th hairstyle on the wedding day and it's not working. They end up stressed out and everything starts to fall behind. So definitely a trial run. Secondly, we want to be mindful about gabbing with your client. Now, I understand it's important to build a relationship with them, to make them feel comfortable, and to nurture them on their wedding day. But we also need to keep an eye on the time. So make sure that you have some sort of way of looking at the time, whether it's a clock on the wall, a wrist watch, or some other method, your cell phone, so that you can stay on track. I also recommend that any makeup artist leaves behind some sort of a touch-up kit for the bride, because what happens during the day is brides get shiny. Typically wedding days are quite hot since most of them happen during the summer months. So a touch-up kit with just their eye color, their lip color, powder or blotting papers so that they can stay with a nice polished look, so they look great for their couples portraits and that sort of thing. Also, I recommend waterproof mascara for obvious reasons. A lot of brides tear up during the ceremony and we don't want them with raccoon streaks going down their face. Nice polished look from start to finish, and the touch-up kit helps them to maintain that throughout the day. Lastly, I want to talk about hairstyles. Now, any hairstyle we create is going to have to last a very long time. A typical wedding day is anywhere from 8 to 10 hours or more. And in the Bay Area, people are often subject to all different types of weather. It can be windy, it can be foggy, it can be really hot, or a combination of all three throughout the day. So whatever kind of hairstyle you create, it needs to have staying power so that it looks just as good 6 hours later for their first dance as it did when you first created it. I know it's nice to think about like cute little ringlets and things like that, but typically by the end of the day, those have fallen flat. So please keep that in mind. And even if you are morally opposed, I really suggest that you give it a hearty dose of hairspray to make sure that it stays in place. Moving on to florists. Now, when flowers are first delivered, typically they are put in vases of water to stay fresh until the last possible second when the bride and her bridesmaids grab them. I suggest that any florist please drop off napkins or paper towels, something like that, so that the bride and her bridesmaids can wipe up the excess water so that it doesn't get all over their gowns, because water stains are not an attractive look for wedding party photos. What is wrong with this photograph? If you look closely, you will notice the groom here does not have his boutonniere. There was a reason for that. They did their first look before the ceremony, and their flowers were not ready in time, so we had to do them without his boutonniere. It's a good idea to check in with your couples to find out if they plan to do a first look. If that is the case, then you need to plan to drop those flowers off at least two hours before the ceremony so that they have them in time. That way, you get beautiful shots with everyone wearing their boutonnieres. Let's talk a little bit about bouquet design. It's important to make sure that you leave enough stem so that the bride can hold the bouquet with both hands. And keep in mind what they're going to look like when they're photographed. When I photograph a bouquet, I typically photograph it one of two ways, either this way, lying on its side, or vertically. So you want to create a shape that's going to look good in photos. If the stems are too short, it looks like a big glob of flowers, not very attractive, so keep it well balanced. Lastly, I would suggest dropping off a few extra blossoms to use in detail shots like this one. It looks really nice with the rings or other jewelry or even invitations, and it creates a nice cohesive look for their wedding album. We're going to move on to invitations. I really just have a few quick words about invitations. Firstly, be mindful about what sort of font you are using. You want the font to be legible in the photographs. So that means to pay attention that the font is not too light and not too small. It needs to be bright and legible. Also, please include 2 extra sets of the invitations, including envelopes and any other pieces or moving parts. That way, when we photograph them, we can photograph the whole suite all together as one photograph, and we've got them all together in one place. Officiants. Officiants are the heart of a wedding day, or one of the hearts. There are many hearts, but they are the first and most important part because of the energy that they bring to the sacred ceremonial piece of the day. The first thing I want to say is, oftentimes, if couples are not working with a planner or coordinator, officiants often end up running the rehearsal times. And you need to remind people during the processional to please slow down. It is not a race, because I sometimes see people come flying down that aisle, and it makes it very difficult to capture good photographs of them. And the couple is going to want this. Secondly, it's very important to think about educating your couples on how to stand during the ring exchange. There is a right way to stand and there is a wrong way to stand, believe it or not. The right way to stand is as these couples are, where the bodies are angled, their bodies are angled slightly towards the guests. That way, everybody can see what's happening. You can clearly see each person's face, you can see their hands, you can see the rings going on, you can see the emotion, and guess what? So can your photographer, and that means that we're going to get better shots rather than their backs turned or their hair over their face. So this couple is doing a fine example of how to stand, and so is this lovely couple. Lastly, officiants, I suggest you stay behind after the ceremony for a shot with the couple. That way we get that done, and it's something that they are going to want, and it's also something that you are going to want. Venues. Whether they're going for a more minimalist look or a much more involved, decorated look, As we look through these photos, you will notice that they all have one thing in common. What is that? You will notice that there are no people. And this is super important if you want to have shots like this that showcase the entire room and all of the details that so many people spent time on. Now, the way to make sure that this happens is to get the reception room set up at least 45 minutes before the ceremony begins. This is typically the time when the bride and groom want to take a little time away to relax before the ceremony, and this is when I typically photograph the reception room. That way we can come in while everything still looks perfect and pristine. We can do full room shots, we can take all of the details on the tables, and we will get those perfect, beautiful shots. Also, some venues offer more than one wedding on a given day. Please, 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 pretty please, make sure that you leave enough time in between wedding number 1 and wedding number 2 so that if things run behind during wedding number 1, you're not going to have your people for wedding number 2 having to wait in the heat or stuffed in the hallway and coming into a trashed venue. And believe it or not, I have seen this happen. Next, it's great practice to provide parking instructions and loading instructions, either to the coordinator or to the vendor team or both. That way everybody knows where they need to go before the day of, so we don't waste time trying to figure that out. And it will cut down on anybody being lost or confused, which we don't want. Next, I want to talk about sweetheart tables. There is a good place to set them up, and there is a not good place to set them up. This shot here is an example of what not to do. Now, the reason this is difficult is because if you notice, behind the couple, there's a whole bank of windows. Now, most receptions happen during the evening, and that means that the photographer needs to photograph with a flash, and a bank of windows means we're going to get a bright hot spot behind them. So we either have to angle ourselves or try some other sort of thing to get a decent shot, but this could all be avoided by setting them up in a different spot without the windows behind them, or even doing some drapes behind the sweetheart table, because as you can see in this shot, there are windows behind here, but they did a really fine job of creating a more closed-in, photo-friendly environment for the couple. Lastly, signage is a great way to make sure that you are taking care of everybody who comes to the wedding. It should be clear and easily spottable from the second people arrive. That way no one ends up lost or confused. Oh, cakes. I love cakes. Now, the first thing I want to say about cakes is we all know how much work goes into creating them. So please steer your couples away from flimsy plastic cake toppers. They cheapen your beautiful masterpiece, they make the image look cheap, and if you look at this one, for instance, all they did was use a few blossoms and some greens, and it is a gorgeous, simple, elegant cake. So please, no ugly toppers. It's also a good practice to leave an information card about the cake with your cake. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that some people have dietary restrictions, so they need to know what's in it and whether or not they can have any. Secondly, some people are totally curious. They just want to know what kind of cake they're going to get. I do. If it's chocolate, I may not be as interested. And lastly, as a photographer, I blog about every wedding that I photograph, and sometimes it's nice to have that sort of information. It's really going to be to your benefit to leave that, because we might be writing more about you and your beautiful work. Speaking about your beautiful work, ask where they are going to set up your cake, and make sure it's not in a dark, ugly, dingy corner. This does happen from time to time. You want it to be a nicer location. As a photographer, yes, obviously I can use lighting to light it well, but if it's put in a dark, dingy corner, it'll be well lit, but it still won't be a beautiful shot. And this is the kind of shot that's going to showcase your work to its best. So this is what we're going for. This is what we get if we do our job the right way. We get beautiful shots like this. Our couples are happy. They're so happy. They're licking it off each other and whatnot. We come to the fun part of the evening. And DJs, this is where we get to talk about you and your role, which is also a very vital role. As we already know, you guys are the life of the party. It is up to you to get the party started and to get people out on the dance floor, and I'm sure you all know exactly how to do that. Playing great music, inviting them out, really getting the energy revved up. But your job is important for a couple other reasons. First of all, when there isn't a coordinator or planner, the photographer and the DJ often work together to keep the timeline on track. I have had weddings where we've had to sort of condense some of the events of the evening because things ran behind earlier in the evening. So we've had to do speeches, cake, bouquet toss, all of that kind of back to back. So you guys we can work together in order to keep the evening on track. It's also your role to MC the evening and to invite everybody who's coming up to give a toast. Now, it's important to think about how these people are positioned, because there's a good way and a bad way, just like everything else. The best way to position the people who are giving the toast is actually going to be to place them in front of the wedding couple. Now, why? Let's think about this. If they are standing in front of the wedding couple, then the wedding couple doesn't need to turn around to look at them. So this way, if they are placed in front, you can see everybody, bride, groom, couple, and the speaker. And that's going to make for the best photo, and it's also going to make for the best experience for everybody else who's watching, because we want to be able to see their faces. There's always a range of emotions, from laughter to tears to like completely, oh my God, I can't believe they just said that. So please make sure that you position your people properly. Lastly, I would like to suggest a Zen approach when it comes to disco lights, because as a photographer, even when I have my flash on high, its highest setting, its most powerful, I cannot override the flashing lights. So particularly in the earlier portion of the evening when we're doing first dance and all of that sort of thing, less is more, and then you can go nuts. If you do your job right, we end up with photos of everybody having a good time. We can see everybody. They don't have purple streaks all over them. They're enjoying their evening. And now we come to wedding planners and coordinators. And there is a reason why I left this category as the last piece that I speak about today. And that is because I think every piece of what I've already said is important for a coordinator to hear, because really, as the team leader, we need to know as a coordinator what all the moving parts are doing and how to keep everybody on track, because you really are the captain of the ship. So one way to create that sense of cohesiveness with your team is to communicate ahead of time. This means sending everybody all of the information they will need for the day. That means the timeline, parking and loading instructions, and also communications, all of our emails, phones, etc. for each and every vendor, because we want to be able to keep in touch. And as the photographer, I need that information later on when it's time for me to send photos to everybody, to share the gallery so that people can download those images for their marketing and promotion, and so that I can tag people in social media. And I don't have time to search everybody's contact info. So make it simple and easy for everybody that you're working with. And also, the weddings that I've seen that have been the most successful are the ones where the coordinator really worked to create a sense of camaraderie and team spirit. And that way we know, like, and trust each other, we support each other, and we end up having a successful day. We also want to think about creating a breathable timeline. I always suggest adding a little extra time between the different portions of the day. So maybe add 15 minutes to the getting ready portion of the day, 15 minutes to the ceremony portion of the day. And the reason for this is because that way we've allowed time for the unexpected, because let's face it, the unexpected often does arise, and that way we save everybody time, stress, and headache. Speaking of time and stress and headache, I learned a neat trick about a year ago, which is to put the start time for the ceremony 15 minutes ahead of when you would like people to be in their seats. That way you cut down on latecomers, and it's a great trick, I think. You also need to inform your photographer about any grand exits, any special entrances, any other special timings that you know are going to occur throughout the day. And that way the photographer will be able to position themselves correctly ahead of time. If we don't know it's going to happen, we may not be there and we're going to miss the shot, particularly in the later portion of the day when it requires setting up lighting stands and flash and all that kind of thing. Lastly, I would suggest creating a timeline where you structure it so that all of the major events of the reception happen at least in the first 2 hours of the reception. And the reason for this is because that's often when you still have the bulk of the guests there. Typically, I've noticed that people start to leave after dinner time, and then you won't have them there for the photos, especially the grand exit. I actually suggest that that happens much earlier than the very last end moment of the wedding. That way you have a lot more guests, you have a much more interesting and fun photo, and you'll have people there for all of the major events of the night. Lastly, remember to ask these folks to slow down as they're processing down the aisle. Super important. These folks, you know what, it's not going to happen. So we'll just let them go and do what they do. And they're fun and cute. And when we do our job, when we all work together, this is what we end up with. A happy couple, a beautiful image, and all of the people that have gone into creating that image. When I look at this image, I see the wedding attire, the florist's work, the makeup artist's work. You see the venue behind. You see how happy they are because their officiant has given them an amazing ceremony. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that you found this information helpful. And if you do have any questions, you can always reach me online at my website, www.photography.bygrier.com.